Officer Vance Harlan smirked with contempt as he deliberately poured his lukewarm coffee directly onto the black woman's shoulder. The liquid soaked through her expensive coat, staining the fabric dark brown as it dripped onto the pavement below. She stood there calmly, coffee pooling at her feet, and simply asked for his badge number. Harlan laughed. "Good luck with that complaint, sweetheart. You're nobody." It was in the shared parking lot between two courthouses. The woman had been walking toward the federal building's rear entrance, briefcase in hand, when Harlan decided she needed to be taught a lesson. To him, she was just another entitled civilian who thought she could walk around his territory without consequence. He had no idea who she really was, because what happened next would destroy Harlan's career and expose a pattern of abuse that had been hidden for years. Later, Officer Vance Harlan was spinning the story of his life. Sitting across from Internal Affairs Detective Elena Carter in the sterile conference room at the local police station, Harlan painted himself as the victim of an aggressive woman who clearly did not respect law enforcement. "Look, Detective Carter, I've been walking this beat for years. I know troublemakers when I see them," Harlan began, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged. "Now this woman comes barreling through the parking lot like she owns the place. I'm standing there with my morning coffee, minding my own business after a long night shift, and she deliberately bumps into me." Harlan leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed defensively. "I mean, these courthouse workers think they run everything. Defense attorneys, clerks, paralegals, they're all the same. They walk around with this attitude like they're better than the people who actually keep the streets safe." Detective Carter made notes, her expression neutral. "Tell me exactly what happened with the coffee, Officer Harlan." "She knocked into my arm and my coffee spilled on her coat. Pure accident." Harlan shrugged as if the incident was barely worth discussing. But instead of apologizing for bumping into him, she got all aggressive, started demanding his badge number, making threats about filing complaints. Classic entitled behavior. What Harlan did not mention was the deliberate way he had tracked the woman's movement across the parking lot. He did not describe how he had positioned himself directly in her path, or how he had calculated the exact moment to pour the coffee. In his version, he was just an innocent officer who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. "She was clearly looking for trouble," Harlan continued. "The way she was dressed, the expensive briefcase, walking toward the federal courthouse like she had some kind of special privileges. These people need to learn that badges matter. Respect matters." Officer Lena Vargas, Harlan's patrol partner, who had arrived at the scene shortly after the incident, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. When Detective Carter turned to her for corroboration, Vargas's voice lacked the confidence of her colleague. "I arrived right after it happened," Vargas said slowly. "Harlan was upset, said this woman had bumped into him, and then got confrontational when he tried to explain about the coffee accident." Vargas avoided eye contact as she spoke, her discomfort with the assault claims evident in her body language. Back at the federal courthouse, security guards were having a very different conversation. Federal Security Chief Jamal Torres was reviewing the duty roster with his team when one of the guards mentioned something significant. "Chief, you know Judge Ellison came back from her family medical leave today, right? She was heading in through the rear entrance this morning when that incident happened in the parking lot." Torres looked up sharply. "Judge Ellison, Federal Judge Maya Ellison." "Yes, sir. She had her keycard and went straight to the federal side, but there was some kind of altercation with a local patrol officer in the shared parking area. Something about coffee being spilled." Meanwhile, Harlan was doubling down on his story. "I filed a counter-complaint against her for disorderly conduct and threatening a police officer. This woman needs to learn that you can't just attack cops and expect to get away with it. Detective Carter paused her note-taking. You're characterizing this as an attack, Officer Harlan? Absolutely. She was aggressive, hostile, clearly looking to cause problems. I've seen this pattern before with these courthouse types. They think their jobs make them untouchable. Harlan's voice took on a harder edge. Some of these people need to be reminded that respect goes both ways. The racial undertones in Harlan's language were not lost on Detective Carter, who had been investigating police misconduct for years. She had heard similar justifications before, the coded language officers used when they wanted to explain away interactions that had gone wrong. Officer Harlan, you mentioned a pattern. Have you had other incidents with courthouse personnel? Harlan waved dismissively. Nothing official, just the usual attitude problems you get from certain types of people. Defense attorneys who think they can mouth off. Clerks who act like they're running the place. Sometimes you have to establish boundaries. What Harlan did not realize was that his boundaries had left a trail. Detective Carter had already begun pulling incident reports, looking for patterns in Harlan's patrol logs. There had been 12 complaints filed against him, all involving black civilians, all dismissed or reduced to minor infractions, all following remarkably similar patterns. As Harlan continued his story, painting himself as a dedicated officer unfairly targeted by an aggressive civilian, he had no idea that security cameras from the federal courthouse had captured the entire incident. He did not know that his text messages from that morning were already being preserved as evidence, and he certainly had no clue about the true identity of the woman he had chosen to humiliate. Look, Detective Carter, I've been doing this job for years without any serious problems, Harlan concluded. I patrol the courthouse district. I know the troublemakers, and I know when someone is looking to cause problems for law enforcement. This woman was clearly one of those people. Officer Vargas remained silent throughout most of Harlan's account, occasionally nodding when prompted, but never adding details that might contradict her partner's version of events. Her discomfort was becoming more apparent as Harlan embellished the story, turning a deliberate assault into a tale of officer victimization. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Officer Vargas? Detective Carter asked. Vargas glanced nervously at Harlan before responding. I just arrived after it happened. I saw Harlan was upset and the woman seemed calm. Maybe too calm, if you know what I mean, like she was planning something. Detective Carter closed her notebook. Thank you, officers. I'll need to review security footage from the area and interview the complainant. You'll be notified if we need additional information. As Harlan left the conference room, he felt confident that his version of events would stand. After all, it was his word against some courthouse worker who had probably never filed a complaint before. He had no idea that soon his entire career would be over, and his name would become a case study in police accountability training programs across the country. The truth, as Harlan would soon discover, had a way of surfacing, especially when it was captured on high-definition security cameras and when the victim happened to hold one of the most powerful positions in the federal justice system. Judge Maya Ellison sat in the same sterile conference room where Harlan had spun his tale just hours earlier. But unlike the officer's defensive posture and elaborate justifications, Maya's testimony was measured, precise, and devastatingly accurate. Her coffee-stained coat hung on the back of her chair, a silent witness to Harlan's assault. At approximately the time I was walking from my vehicle to the rear entrance of the federal courthouse, Maya began, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to being heard and believed. I had parked in space F7 of the shared lot, as I have done for years when using the federal building. Detective Carter looked up from her notes. Yes, I've been working in the federal courthouse system since 2008. Maya's response was matter-of-fact, revealing nothing about her actual position. This morning marked my return after family medical leave to care for my mother following her surgery. The precision of Maya's language immediately set her apart from typical civilian complaints. She spoke in the measured tones of someone familiar with legal proceedings, someone who understood the weight of words and the importance of accuracy. As I approached the federal building, Officer Vance Harlan, badge number 4729, positioned himself directly in my path. His movements were deliberate, not coincidental. Maya's recall was photographic. He was holding a white disposable coffee cup, approximately 12 ounces, with the Metro Coffee logo visible. Detective Carter paused her writing. The level of detail was extraordinary, far beyond what most civilians would notice or remember under stress. The officer made eye contact with me from approximately 15 feet away. As I continued walking, he said, "Move it, courthouse trash. Know your place." Maya repeated Harlan's words without emotion, letting their ugliness speak for itself. He then deliberately tilted his cup and poured the contents onto my left shoulder and coat. How can you be certain it was deliberate? Yeah, the trajectory and timing. Officer Harlan had to extend his arm and adjust his wrist angle to ensure the liquid reached my shoulder rather than falling to the ground. The action required conscious coordination. Maya's analysis was clinical, precise. Additionally, his positioning suggested premeditation. He had moved to intercept my path rather than maintaining his original position. Detective Carter was impressed by the clarity and detail of the account. In her experience, traumatized witnesses often struggled with specifics, but this woman spoke with the confidence of someone trained in observation and testimony. What happened after the assault? I requested Officer Harlan's badge number, which he provided verbally, 4729. I also noted his patrol unit number, 47, and the timestamp on my phone. Maya pulled out her device, showing the precise timing. Officer Harlan then said, "Good luck with that complaint, sweetheart. You're nobody." The final insult hung in the air. Detective Carter had heard variations of this phrase in dozens of misconduct cases, usually deployed by officers who believed their targets had no recourse, no power, no voice that mattered. Were there any witnesses to this incident? Dr. Jamal Torres was entering the federal building at the same time. He's a courthouse psychiatrist who begins his rounds early. He witnessed the entire interaction from approximately 30 feet away. Maya's knowledge of the courthouse personnel suggested deep familiarity with the federal system. Additionally, the rear entrance security cameras would have captured the incident. I used my keycard to enter. Detective Carter made note of the keycard detail. Access to the federal courthouse rear entrance was restricted to judges, senior staff, and security personnel. Typical defense attorneys and clerks used the main public entrance. Detective Carter realized she had not gotten the complainant's full name yet. Williams, Dr. Maya Ellison. The title was delivered casually, but it carried weight. In the courthouse system, the title doctor usually indicated either a medical professional or someone with a law degree at the highest levels. Dr. Ellison, you mentioned this was your first day back from family medical leave. Where exactly do you work in the federal courthouse? Maya's response was measured. I work in the judicial wing, 3rd floor. I was returning to my chambers this morning to prepare for today's docket. The word chambers hung in the air with particular significance. Only judges had chambers. Detective Carter felt a chill of realization beginning to form, but she continued with her standard questions. Have you ever had any previous interactions with Officer Harlan? No. Officer Harlan patrols the local courthouse district. Our paths would not typically cross as the federal and local systems operate independently. Maya's knowledge of jurisdictional boundaries was another indicator of her deep familiarity with court operations. Additionally, my absence would explain why Officer Harlan was unfamiliar with my identity. The interview continued with Maya providing detailed responses to every question. She described the temperature of the coffee, estimated the volume spilled, identified potential witnesses, and provided a timeline accurate to the minute. Most remarkably, she showed no anger, no desire for revenge, only a calm insistence on accountability. As the session concluded, Detective Carter could not shake the feeling that there was more to this story. The complainant's precise legal language, her access to restricted areas, her reference to chambers and docket, everything suggested this was not just another courthouse employee who had been harassed by an overzealous officer. Dr. Ellison, is there anything else you'd like to add to your statement? Maya considered the question carefully. Officer Harlan's behavior suggests a pattern of targeting individuals he perceives as vulnerable or powerless. His language indicated racial animus, and his confidence in avoiding consequences suggests this is not his first such incident. She paused, her next words carrying particular weight. Justice requires accountability, Detective Carter. Not just for this incident, but for the pattern it represents. After Maya left, Detective Carter immediately began pulling security footage and cross-referencing Harlan's patrol logs. She also made a note to verify Dr. Ellison's employment status with the Federal Courthouse Administration. Something about this case felt different, more significant than a typical misconduct complaint. What Detective Carter did not know was that she was about to uncover one of the most explosive police accountability cases in the city's history. The woman who had been assaulted in the courthouse parking lot was not just any federal employee. She was about to become the judge who would oversee Harlan's downfall. By the end of the week, Harlan's name would be headline news. His career would be over, and his victim would be revealed as one of the most respected federal judges in the district. The coffee stains on Maya's coat would become evidence in a federal civil rights case that would change police training protocols citywide. But for now, Harlan remained blissfully unaware that he had just assaulted a sitting federal judge and that his days of getting away with racially motivated misconduct were about to end forever. That evening, Judge Maya Ellison sat in her home office, surrounded by the quiet symbols of a distinguished legal career. Her federal judicial robes hung on a mahogany stand in the corner, partially visible behind stacks of law books. Diplomas from Harvard Law School and her judicial appointment certificate lined the walls. But tonight, her attention was focused on something far more troubling. On her computer screen was Officer Vance Harlan's complete disciplinary record. 12 complaints, all involving black civilians, all mysteriously dismissed or reduced to minor infractions. As a federal judge, Maya had access to law enforcement databases that most civilians could never see, and what she found painted a disturbing picture of systemic failure. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How was your first day back, sweetheart? Are you taking care of yourself?" Maya smiled softly, remembering the time she had spent caring for her mother after surgery. Those quiet weeks had been a reminder of what truly mattered: family, dignity, and ensuring justice for those who could not fight for themselves. Her mother, a retired civil rights activist, had raised her with a simple principle: when you have power, you use it to protect those who do not. "The first day was eventful, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow. Love you." Returning to her research, Maya opened Harlan's patrol logs. The pattern was undeniable. Complaints filed by black civilians for aggressive contact during routine stops. Reports of accidental spills and unintentional physical contact. Each incident dismissed as a misunderstanding. Each victim left without recourse. Case 1. Mrs. Harriet Jenkins, 67, complained that Officer Harlan deliberately knocked her grocery bags from her hands during a jaywalking stop. Harlan claimed she resisted and the bags fell accidentally. Case dismissed. Case 2. Mr. Jamal Thompson, 24, alleged that Harlan poured his drink on him during a traffic stop, claiming Thompson was uncooperative. Harlan reported that Thompson knocked the beverage from his hand during aggressive movement, reduced to a written warning. Case 3. Dr. Nadia Mitchell, 35, a pediatrician, reported that Harlan shoved her against her car during a parking violation stop. Harlan stated she stumbled backward and he was helping steady her. No action taken. The files revealed a sophisticated pattern of abuse disguised as accidents and misunderstandings. Harlan had learned exactly how to assault people while maintaining plausible deniability. Each incident was minor enough to avoid serious scrutiny, but together they painted a picture of deliberate, racially motivated harassment. Maya leaned back in her chair, studying the framed photo on her desk. Herself and her mentor, retired federal judge Eleanor Hayes, at her confirmation ceremony years ago. Judge Hayes had been the one to encourage her to pursue the federal bench, despite the barriers facing black women in the judiciary. Maya, Judge Hayes had said that day, the bench is not just about interpreting law. It is about ensuring that law serves justice, especially for those who have no voice. Tonight, those words carried special weight. Maya picked up her phone and dialed Judge Hayes's number. "Eleanor, it's Maya. I need to talk through something with you." For the next hour, Maya described the morning's incident and her subsequent research into Harlan's background. Judge Hayes listened without interruption, her decades of experience recognizing the gravity of the situation. "Maya, this is not just about your assault. This is about a pattern of civil rights violations that has been ignored for years. What are you thinking of doing? I want to ensure this follows proper channels. No shortcuts. No special treatment because of my position. But I also want to make sure this pattern does not continue." Maya's voice was measured, deliberate. "How do I balance my role as a victim with my responsibilities as a federal judge? You recuse yourself from any direct judicial proceedings, but you ensure the system works as it should. You file the complaint, provide the evidence, and let justice follow its course." Judge Hayes paused. "But Maya, you also use your knowledge and access to ensure that all the evidence comes to light. Those other victims deserve justice too." After ending the call, Maya composed a detailed email to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. She outlined Harlan's pattern of behavior, attached the relevant case files, and recommended a comprehensive investigation into the local police department's handling of misconduct complaints. She also reached out to Dr. Jamal Torres, the courthouse psychiatrist, who had witnessed the morning's assault. His testimony would be crucial, and as a federal employee, he would understand the significance of what he had seen. Looking at her reflection in the dark window, Maya saw a woman who had spent decades fighting for justice. First as a prosecutor, then as a defense attorney, and finally as a federal judge. Tomorrow, she would face Officer Vance Harlan again, but this time he would discover exactly who he had chosen to assault. The coffee stains on her coat had been photographed and documented. The security footage was being preserved. The pattern of abuse was being exposed. And Officer Vance Harlan, who had spent years believing he was untouchable, was about to learn that justice, like truth, has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. As Maya prepared for bed, she felt no anger toward Harlan, only a quiet determination to ensure that his pattern of abuse would end with her. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would shock everyone except the woman who had spent her career ensuring that power could never hide from accountability. The truth began to unravel Officer Vance Harlan's lies. What started as his word against a courthouse clerk quickly became an avalanche of evidence that would bury his career and expose a systematic pattern of racially motivated abuse. Dr. Jamal Torres was the first domino to fall. The courthouse psychiatrist had arrived at work early that morning to prepare for a competency hearing, and he had witnessed the entire assault from the federal building's entrance. When Detective Carter contacted him for an interview, his account shattered Harlan's fabricated story completely. I saw the whole thing, Dr. Torres told Detective Carter, his voice carrying the measured authority of someone who testified regularly in federal court. Officer Harlan deliberately positioned himself in the woman's path. There was no collision, no accident, no stumbling. He tracked her movement across the parking lot and intercepted her specifically to pour that coffee on her shoulder. Dr. Torres pulled out his phone, showing Detective Carter a photo he had taken immediately after the incident. I documented this because the deliberate nature of the assault was so obvious. Look at his body position. He had to extend his arm and angle his wrist to ensure the liquid hit her coat rather than the ground. The photo was devastating. It showed Harlan's calculated posture, Maya's calm response, and most importantly, the clear distance between them that proved no bumping had occurred. Dr. Torres had unwittingly captured the moment that would destroy Harlan's defense. But the real breakthrough came when Detective Carter obtained the security footage from the federal courthouse. The high-definition cameras had captured every second of the encounter in crystal-clear detail. What she saw made her stomach turn. The footage showed Harlan spotting Maya from across the parking lot and deliberately altering his path to intercept her. His movements were predatory, calculated. He waited for the perfect moment, then poured the coffee with obvious intent while delivering his racist insults. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. This was a deliberate assault motivated by racial hatred. Jesus Christ, Detective Carter muttered as she reviewed the footage for the third time. In years of investigating police misconduct, she had rarely seen such clear evidence of intentional abuse of power. The coffee temperature analysis provided another layer of damning evidence. The liquid was still warm enough to potentially cause burns, measuring 140 degrees Fahrenheit when it hit Maya's coat. Had it been hot coffee, the assault could have resulted in serious injury. Harlan's choice of lukewarm coffee suggested he knew exactly what he was doing, causing humiliation and harm without leaving obvious physical damage. But Detective Carter's most explosive discovery came when she obtained a warrant for Harlan's phone records and text messages. What she found revealed a pattern of racist commentary that went far beyond a single incident. Text message from Harlan to Officer Davis 2 hours before the assault. Another night watching the courthouse. These people think they run everything. Time to remind them who has the real power. Text message from Harlan to Officer Martinez 30 minutes after the assault. Taught another entitled some respect today. Coffee works better than words sometimes. Text message from Harlan to Officer Kim the following day. Internal Affairs wants to talk about my incident yesterday. These courthouse parasites don't know when to quit. The messages revealed not just racial animus, but a calculated mindset of someone who viewed assault as a tool for maintaining what he saw as the proper social order. Harlan was not just a racist. He was a predator who used his badge to terrorize civilians he deemed inferior. Officer Vargas, Harlan's patrol partner, finally cracked under the weight of the evidence. When Detective Carter confronted her with the security footage and text messages, her fabricated story collapsed immediately. Look, I did not want to lie, but Harlan said it was just a misunderstanding. Vargas admitted, her voice shaking. When I got to the parking lot, he told me this woman had bumped into him and spilled his coffee, then got aggressive when he tried to explain, but I never actually saw what happened. Vargas's confession opened the floodgates. Harlan has this thing about courthouse people, especially black women. He calls them entitled and uppity. He's always talking about putting them in their place. I should have said something years ago. The revelation prompted Detective Carter to dig deeper into Harlan's history. And what she found was a horror show of systematic abuse. The 12 previous complaints were not isolated incidents. They were part of a deliberate pattern of targeting vulnerable civilians. Mrs. Harriet Jenkins, the 67-year-old, whose groceries Harlan had accidentally knocked down, broke into tears when Detective Carter contacted her. I knew he did it on purpose, but who was going to believe me over a police officer? I'm just an old black woman trying to get home with her shopping. Mr. Jamal Thompson, the 24-year-old who had Harlan's drink poured on him during a traffic stop, was equally relieved to finally be believed. He looked me right in the eye when he did it, like he was daring me to say something. Then he smiled when I filed the complaint like he knew nothing would happen. Dr. Nadia Mitchell, the pediatrician who had been shoved against her car, was furious that Harlan's pattern had been allowed to continue. I have medical training. I know the difference between an accident and an assault. He pushed me deliberately, then had the audacity to claim he was helping me. Each victim's story followed the same pattern. Deliberate physical contact disguised as accidents, racist language masked as law enforcement authority, and complaints systematically dismissed by a system that chose to believe officers over civilians. The breaking point came when Detective Carter discovered Harlan's training records. He had attended multiple seminars on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity, meaning he knew exactly how inappropriate his behavior was. His actions were not the result of poor training or misunderstanding. They were conscious choices to abuse his power. Chief of Police Victor Lang was called in for an emergency meeting when the full scope of Harlan's misconduct became clear. Faced with video evidence, racist text messages, witness testimony, and a pattern spanning years, he had no choice but to recommend immediate suspension and federal investigation. This is a catastrophic failure of our oversight systems, Chief Lang admitted to Detective Carter. How did 12 complaints get dismissed without proper investigation? How did this pattern go unnoticed? The answer was uncomfortable but clear. The system had been designed to protect officers like Harlan, not the civilians he was sworn to serve. Complaints from black citizens were routinely minimized. Witnesses were dismissed as biased, and officers were given the benefit of every doubt. As Detective Carter compiled her final report, she realized this case would change everything. The victim's identity was still unknown to Harlan, but her professional handling of the situation and the quality of evidence she had provided suggested someone with serious legal training. Whoever she was, she had just handed the department the most comprehensive police misconduct case in its history. Harlan remained confident that his years of service and clean record would protect him. He had no idea that his victim had access to federal databases, that security cameras had captured his assault, or that his own text messages had sealed his fate. Most importantly, he had no clue that the woman he had humiliated in a courthouse parking lot was about to become the federal judge who would oversee his complete destruction. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and devastating. Officer Vance Harlan's days of racially motivated abuse were numbered, and justice was finally coming for the victims he had terrorized with impunity. Later, Officer Vance Harlan strutted through the federal courthouse doors for the first time in his career, still confident his story would stick. The investigation had escalated to federal jurisdiction, but Harlan remained cocky. After all, It was his word against some courthouse clerk. "Not just another dog and pony show," Harlan told his attorney as they navigated unfamiliar hallways. "Years on the force. They won't throw that away over spilled coffee." His lawyer, David Morrison, looked worried. "Marcus, the evidence is damning. We should consider a plea." Harlan scoffed. "For what? An accident with some entitled courthouse worker? Please." They followed a federal marshal down corridors lined with portraits of distinguished judges. Harlan barely glanced at them, maintaining his arrogant swagger. He had no idea he was walking toward the most humiliating moment of his life. "Federal Courtroom 3A," the marshal announced, opening doors to reveal a stately room with mahogany paneling and the federal seal behind the judge's bench. Harlan expected another routine hearing. Instead, he found himself in the formal setting where federal justice was dispensed, a place of power he had never respected. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Maya Ellison," the bailiff announced. Harlan barely paid attention, focused on his prepared justifications. He stayed seated until his lawyer grabbed his arm. Only then did Harlan look toward the bench. The woman entering wore black judicial robes, but something seemed familiar. As she took her seat, Harlan's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. The robes, the authority, the calm expression he had seen before. Then recognition hit like a physical blow. "Wait." Harlan's voice came out strangled. You're the woman from the parking lot." Judge Maya Ellison looked down from the federal bench, her expression as calm as when coffee had dripped from her coat. The transformation was stunning, from perceived powerless civilian to one of the most powerful positions in American justice. "Officer Harlan," Judge Ellison said, her voice carrying federal judicial authority. "You poured coffee on a sitting federal judge. You called a Harvard law graduate and veteran of the federal bench courthouse trash." Color drained from Harlan's face. His mouth opened soundlessly. Around the courtroom, everyone grasped the implications of his catastrophic mistake. Harlan's lawyer closed his eyes, realizing his client had committed spectacular career suicide. "Your Honor," Morrison began shakily, "my client had no idea of your identity." "That's precisely the problem," Judge Ellison replied calmly. "Officer Harlan did not assault me because he knew I was a judge. He assaulted me because he assumed I was powerless. He saw a black woman and decided she needed to be put in her place." Her quiet authority filled the courtroom. Everyone understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, not just a spectacular mistake revealed, but hidden power displayed in full majesty. The question is not whether Officer Harlan would have behaved differently knowing my position. The question is why he felt entitled to assault any civilian regardless of status. Harlan found his voice barely audible. I did not know. If I had known you were a federal judge, would assault be acceptable if I were a defense attorney, court clerk, janitor, any citizen walking to work?" The questions hung in the air, driving home the fundamental injustice of Harlan's actions and assumptions. Harlan's career, pension, freedom, everything crumbled as he stood before the woman he had humiliated, who now held his fate. The parking lot where he had felt powerful seemed like a different universe from this courtroom where real power resided. Judge Ellison would recuse herself from presiding due to being the victim. But her presence on that bench sent an unmistakable message. Justice had found its voice, and it belonged to the woman Harlan had tried to silence with coffee and contempt. Later, visiting federal judge Carlos Rivera presided over Harlan's formal hearing, while Judge Ellison, having properly recused herself, sat in the witness section. What followed was a methodical dissection of years of racially motivated abuse that had been hidden in plain sight. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Lena Park began with surgical precision. Officer Harlan, you have testified this was an isolated incident, a misunderstanding. Let us examine that claim. Harlan, visibly shaken since discovering his victim's true identity, tried to maintain his composure. Yes, ma'am. Just an unfortunate accident that got blown out of proportion. An accident? Prosecutor Park pulled out a thick file. Let us discuss your pattern of accidents involving black civilians over the years. Harlan's attorney objected, but Judge Rivera overruled. The pattern was directly relevant to determining whether this was an isolated incident or part of systematic civil rights violations. Mrs. Harriet Jenkins, age 67, you knocked groceries from her hands during a jaywalking stop. Your report claimed she resisted, and the bags fell accidentally. Do you remember Mrs. Jenkins, Officer Harlan? Harlan shifted uncomfortably. Vaguely. Like I said, she was uncooperative. Uncooperative. Park turned to the gallery. Mrs. Jenkins, would you please stand? A dignified elderly woman rose from the back of the courtroom. Mrs. Jenkins, please tell the court what Officer Harlan said when he knocked your groceries down. Mrs. Jenkins's voice was clear and strong. He said, "Watch yourself, Grandma. These streets aren't for your kind after dark." Then he deliberately swung his arm and scattered my groceries across the sidewalk. Harlan's face flushed. That's not... She's misremembering. Mr. Jamal Thompson, age 24. Traffic stop. Park continued relentlessly. You poured your drink on him, claiming he knocked the beverage from his hand during aggressive movement. Mr. Thompson, please stand. A young man in a business suit stood up. Officer Harlan looked me right in the eye and said, "You need to learn some respect for authority, boy." Then he dumped his entire Gatorade on my shirt and told me to drive away before he found something to arrest me for. Dr. Nadia Mitchell, pediatrician, parking violation. Park's voice gained intensity. You shoved her against her car, claiming she stumbled backward and you were helping steady her. Dr. Mitchell. A professional woman in medical scrubs stood. Officer Harlan pushed me so hard against my car that I had bruises for a week. He said, "Doctors think they're better than everyone else. You're not special here." One by one, Harlan's victims stood and shared their stories. Each account followed the same pattern: deliberate physical contact, racist language, and official reports that transformed assault into accident. The cumulative effect was devastating. Harlan's attorney tried damage control. Your Honor, these are isolated incidents spread over years. 12 incidents, Park interrupted. All involving black civilians, all involving deliberate physical contact, all dismissed or reduced by a system that chose to believe Officer Harlan over his victims. Judge Rivera leaned forward. Officer Harlan, how do you explain this pattern? Harlan's composure finally cracked. These people, they do not understand how law enforcement works. Sometimes you have to establish authority. They were all being difficult, uncooperative, uncooperative. Park repeated the word like a weapon. Mrs. Jenkins was walking home with groceries. Mr. Thompson was sitting in his legally parked car. Dr. Mitchell was putting money in a parking meter. What exactly were they being uncooperative about? They had attitudes. They did not show proper respect. Proper respect. Park turned to Judge Ellison in the gallery. Officer Harlan, what proper respect did Judge Ellison fail to show when she was walking to work? The question hung in the air like a blade. Harlan had painted himself into a corner with no escape. I did not know she was a judge. So assault is acceptable? as long as the victim is not a federal judge? Your testimony suggests you believe you have the right to physically attack civilians who do not show you what you consider proper respect. Harlan's years of service unraveled in real time. Each question exposed another layer of abuse. Another victim silenced by a system designed to protect officers over civilians. Police Chief Victor Lang took the stand, forced to admit that Harlan's complaints had been routinely dismissed without proper investigation. We failed these victims. We failed the community. Officer Harlan's pattern should have been stopped years ago. The hearing revealed not just one officer's racism, but an entire system's complicity in allowing abuse to continue unchecked. Harlan's text messages were read aloud, his victims given voices they had been denied for years, and his pattern of targeting those he perceived as powerless was exposed in devastating detail. By the time cross-examination concluded, Harlan's defense lay in ruins. His attorney could only watch as years of hidden abuse were dragged into the light. And his client's career ended not with honors, but with federal charges that would follow him forever. The federal courtroom was packed as prosecutor Lena Park rose for her closing argument. In the gallery sat 12 victims of Harlan's abuse, Judge Ellison among them, and dozens of community members who had come to witness justice finally served. The weight of years of ignored complaints and dismissed concerns filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Park began, her voice carrying the authority of the federal government. "This case is about more than one officer's misconduct. This is about a systematic pattern of civil rights violations that was allowed to flourish because the victims were Black and their voices were ignored." Harlan sat at the defense table, his earlier arrogance replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his life crumble. His attorney had advised him to accept a plea deal, but Harlan's pride had prevented him from admitting guilt. Now he faced the full force of federal prosecution. Officer Vance Harlan stands accused of violating 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. But the evidence shows this was not a single incident. This was a career-long pattern of using his badge to terrorize civilians he deemed inferior. Park walked toward the jury, her voice gaining intensity. The defendant poured coffee on federal Judge Maya Ellison, not because he knew she was a judge, but because he assumed she was powerless. He saw a Black woman and decided she needed to be humiliated. This assumption of powerlessness drove years of abuse. The prosecutor turned to face Harlan directly. 12 victims, all Black civilians, all subjected to deliberate physical contact disguised as accidents, all filing complaints that were systematically dismissed by a department more interested in protecting officers than citizens. Judge Rivera maintained perfect judicial composure, but the gravity of the case was evident in his measured attention to every word. "The evidence is overwhelming," Park continued. "Security footage showing deliberate assault, text messages revealing racial animus, witness testimony exposing a pattern of abuse, and Officer Harlan's own words in this courtroom admitting he believed these citizens needed to show him proper respect." She paused, letting the implications sink in. Proper respect, as if respect is something that can be beaten into people with coffee, with drinks, with physical intimidation. As if a badge grants the right to assault civilians who do not demonstrate sufficient subservience. The impact on the gallery was visible. Mrs. Jenkins wiped tears from her eyes. Mr. Thompson clenched his fists. Dr. Mitchell nodded grimly. Each victim had waited years for this moment of accountability. Harlan's attorney, David Morrison, attempted a final defense. "Officers make split-second decisions under pressure. My client made mistakes, but they were not motivated by racial hatred. These were lapses in judgment, not federal crimes." Judge Rivera listened respectfully, but the defense felt hollow against the mountain of evidence. Morrison continued, "Officer Harlan has served his community for years. One moment of poor judgment should not destroy an entire career." Park rose for her rebuttal, her voice sharp with controlled anger. One moment? 12 documented incidents over years is not one moment. It is a pattern. A career built on terrorizing citizens whose only crime was existing while black in Officer Harlan's presence. She turned to address the broader implications. This case sends a message that badges do not grant immunity from consequences, that federal civil rights laws have meaning, that victims who were ignored for years finally have a voice that matters. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Rivera prepared to deliver his verdict. Harlan's fate hung in the balance, along with a message about whether police accountability was real or just another empty promise. "Officer Vance Harlan," Judge Rivera began, his voice carrying the full weight of federal authority. "You have been found guilty on all charges of civil rights violations under federal law." The words hit Harlan like physical blows. His shoulders sagged as the reality of federal conviction sank in. "The evidence demonstrates a systematic pattern of racially motivated abuse spanning years. You used your position of authority to terrorize citizens based on their race, then relied on institutional protection to avoid consequences." Judge Rivera continued, his tone growing sterner. "Federal conviction for civil rights violations under color of law carries serious penalties. You are sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all pension benefits, and permanent prohibition from law enforcement employment." The gallery erupted in quiet satisfaction. Justice had finally been served after years of institutional failure. Additionally, Judge Rivera added, "This court recommends a comprehensive federal investigation into the police department's handling of misconduct complaints. The systematic dismissal of legitimate grievances enabled Officer Harlan's pattern of abuse." Police Chief Victor Lang, present for the verdict, looked visibly shaken. The institutional reckoning was just beginning. Judge Ellison remained composed throughout the proceedings, but her presence sent an unmistakable message. The woman Harlan had tried to humiliate with coffee and racial slurs had become the catalyst for federal accountability that would change police training nationwide. As Harlan was led away in handcuffs, the victims he had terrorized finally felt vindicated. Mrs. Jenkins smiled through her tears. Mr. Thompson exhaled deeply. Dr. Mitchell nodded with satisfaction. Their complaints, dismissed for years, had finally resulted in justice. The federal conviction meant Harlan would serve real prison time, not the administrative leave and transfers that typically followed police misconduct. His name would become a case study in civil rights violations, a cautionary tale taught in law enforcement academies across the country. But perhaps most importantly, 12 victims who had been told their experiences did not matter finally heard the federal government declare that their civil rights had value, their dignity deserved protection, and their voices would be heard. Officer Vance Harlan entered federal prison, serving as a reminder that no badge grants immunity from accountability when civil rights violations reach federal court. His years of abuse had ended with federal conviction, institutional reform, and a message that justice, however delayed, would ultimately prevail. Later, Officer Vance Harlan began serving his 3-year federal sentence. The man who had spent years terrorizing black civilians now wore an orange jumpsuit. His days of wielding a badge to intimidate were over forever. Judge Maya Ellison continued her distinguished career, but her impact extended far beyond her courtroom. The coffee-stained coat became preserved evidence, symbolizing how hidden power emerges to deliver justice when least expected. The police department underwent massive reforms. Chief Lang implemented new accountability measures. bias training became mandatory, and complaint investigations transferred to independent civilian oversight. Harlan's abuse pattern had exposed systemic failures that could no longer be ignored. Most importantly, 12 silenced victims found their voices amplified nationwide. Mrs. Harriet Jenkins became an advocate for elderly citizens' rights. Mr. Jamal Thompson started a community organization supporting young men targeted by police misconduct. Dr. Nadia Mitchell testified before Congress about racial profiling. Their stories, once dismissed as isolated complaints, became the foundation for federal legislation strengthening civil rights protections. Harlan's victims transformed from powerless targets into powerful voices for change. The case became required reading in law schools nationwide. Harvard Law School created the Maya Ellison Fellowship for Civil Rights Students. The fellowship description read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied when courage meets opportunity." The coffee shop outside the courthouse created the Justice Blend, bold, strong, and impossible to ignore. The owner, inspired by Judge Ellison's dignity under assault, donated profits to legal aid organizations serving marginalized communities. Harlan's story became a cautionary tale in police academies, reminding officers that badges grant authority to serve, not license to abuse. His text messages and testimony were used in training programs showing how racial bias corrupts law enforcement. For Judge Ellison, the incident reinforced her mother's lesson about using power to protect the powerless. She continued hearing cases with the same measured dignity shown in that parking lot, never forgetting that justice works best when it is unexpected and absolute. The parking lot where Harlan had felt so powerful remained unchanged, but its meaning transformed. Federal courthouse employees now pointed it out to visitors, sharing how one officer's assumption of powerlessness led to complete downfall. Harlan's prison sentence would end eventually, but federal conviction meant permanent prohibition from law enforcement. The badge that had protected him for years was gone forever, replaced by a criminal record following him for life. This story proves justice is not about revenge. It is about accountability. It is about ensuring power cannot hide behind badges and dignity cannot be stolen with coffee and contempt. Everyday people face situations where power seems stacked against them. But as Judge Maya Ellison demonstrated, real power often lies hidden, waiting for the right moment to emerge and restore balance to an unjust world. One of the most valuable lessons in this story is that true power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it stands in silence, carries dignity under pressure, and waits for the right moment for truth to speak. Officer Harlan believed Maya was nobody, and that belief exposed the darkness in his character. He thought power meant humiliation, control, and fear. But real power looked very different. It looked like calm restraint, self-respect, wisdom, and the courage to let justice work through truth instead of anger. In life, many people will judge us too quickly. They may see our skin, our clothes, our job, or our silence, and decide we are weak, unimportant, or easy to disrespect. But this story reminds us that a person's worth is never defined by someone else's arrogance. Every human being deserves dignity, and every act of cruelty carries consequences, even when those consequences are delayed. Maya did not scream, beg, or seek revenge. She stood with grace, and that grace became stronger than Harlan's hatred. That is a lesson the world desperately needs today. Never misuse your position to make others feel small, because character will always reveal who truly holds strength. And if you are the one being mistreated, never forget that silence is not weakness and dignity is not defeat. Sometimes the calmest person in the room is carrying the deepest strength of all. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated, and how did you rise above it? And if you believe stories like this can inspire courage, wisdom, and justice, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more powerful life lessons.